Some audio problems with the beginning of this demonstration. I'm not going to try to lip sync. I'm going to overdub. Tonight we're going to talk about texturing with 5 mechanical texturing tools. And texturing is where you're actually changing the surface of the wood by look and feel. You can use a number of different tools. I've got a number of references on my blog spot here that's listed on the screen. I've got a PDF reprint of a magazine article in American Woodturning, December issue of 2013 on spiraling and texturing, and a general handout on texturing. These are the tools we're going to talk about tonight. The Sorby Spiraling and Texturing system, both the micro and the full size, the knurling tools such as the Wagner, and the Dremel burr tool, which is like the crown decorating tool elf. I made my own version. There's a handout on that as well on how to make that tool with the Dremel burr on my website. I put these in this particular notebook and passed them around to the group, but you can download all those files on my website. The biggest difference between the micro and the full-size Sorby spiraling system generally is the size of the work you're going to do. You can get similar effects, but if you're doing larger work on larger bowls and platters, the larger size would be preferable. If you're doing smaller work, then the Sorby micro system would be preferable, and you can actually get that smaller one tool inside the lid of small boxes. So it kind of depends on what you're going to be working on. First thing we're going to look at is the Sorby texturing tool. It's a rotating wheel mounted on a shaft, and we'll see a picture of that in just a moment. I'm going to set the tool rest at where when I put the tool on it, it'll be at cutting height. It's a scraper, so generally we're going to put this in the negative rate position. That is, when the tool is actually engaging on the wood with some pressure, you're going to be lifting the handle. Now, this is a picture of the texturing wheel. It comes to a point, and you'll see the differences compared to the spiraling wheel. I took the texturing wheel from my Sorby system and actually mounted on this separate shaft. It's got a bearing on it. This is the Sorby spiraling texturing system handle. It comes with this what I call a saddle that you can replicate the angle from left and right, and makes it repeatable. You don't really use this shaft on the texturing tool. Generally, the speed we're going to be using on texturing is going to be from about 500 to 600. This is the micro tool. Again, it's got the saddle on it, and it's got an index or witness mark on both of these tools etched in it, and there's numbers on the larger tool. Things for big things. As a general rule of thumb, you're going to texture at a speed of about 400 to 600. There's variations, but that'll generally get you in the ballpark. Now, because I'm going to go through these 5 different tools, I want to allocate my time so I don't shortchange you on anything. So if somebody can look at their watch and give me a 15-minute warning, kind of let me know when I need to change to the next tool. So first we're going to start off, we're going to change the speed of this thing down to about, this is on the test, what speed? 400, 600, give or take. It's not real critical. These are really scrapers, so you generally want to, when I say that, the key is the handle needs to be higher than the edge, because they're not really cutting. They'll make shavings like scrapers will, but it's a scraper. I'm going to start off with this straight up and down and show you what kind of results you'll get. You bear down, gauge it, lift the handle, and then you can move it a little bit, move it a lot. But I'm not lifting it off the surface. Now let's see what kind of results we get. You can see that it's not very attractive, because what's happening is it's falling in a pattern of one cog apart. So there's a couple of ways to remedy that. And the easiest one is we're just going to change the diameter of the wood. So let's do that real fast. And let me talk briefly about safety. I'm wearing safety glasses for small spindle work that's quality wood. In other words, it doesn't have voids, cracks, it's not punky, it's not coming off of this chuck. So otherwise, if I was dealing with something bigger, I would wear a face shield. But for small work like this on texturing, on spindle work, I don't get too concerned about it, but I do wear safety glasses. I'm not going to wear over glasses because it's a little harder for me to see with this light in here. So let's try it again. Now, you want to keep the distance on this thing far enough that when you're holding it, you're not accidentally going to touch that wheel while it's spinning, because it will chew you up pretty good. I get that secondhand. I have not experienced it personally. Going too fast. We'll slow it back down. Now, this tool has a bearing on it, so it spins very freely. Now you see we get an entirely different texture. Now, can y'all pick up that real clear? Let me get a...
What did you change that time?
All I did was change the diameter. So let's do this. Let's see if it shows up any better.
So the overall speed is slower.
The speed really not having much of an impact on this, to tell you the truth, because of the contact of the wood. That gear is staying in place. That pops it a little bit better, right? Y'all can see it a little bit. Because the gear, it stays in contact with the wood, it doesn't come off, so the speed, as long as you stay within a range, you go too fast, you're going to maybe lose control and you might get a different pattern, but otherwise, that's always in contact. So whether I go 400 or 600 within some variation, it's not going to change the pattern. What changed the pattern was me changing the diameter, so now when it comes around in a full circle, it didn't fall back in the same hole. It started over again. And it gives you what I would call a orange peel effect, which can look very nice on some things. I'm going to pass around a number of things. Here's a sample board with the instructions. I had to take notes so I could remember what in the world I did, because a lot of these things, it's hard to look at it and say which tool you use, because you can get similar results with different tools. Some of that chatter tool and some of that's the knurling tool, some of it's spiraling and some of it's texturing. Sometimes there's two tools on one particular one, and some of them have got some type of wax on it. Now that's the orange peel, straight up and down. Now let's try it and angle it just a little bit. And as a general rule, when I angle this, I like to move in the direction of the lower edge. That's not ironclad, but that's my general practice. Can you pick up that? What you get is a much, let me get a, toothbrush here. Scrub off some of the fuzzies here. My wife will never know I used her toothbrush.
We won't tell.
But it gives you a much more pronounced, bolder type of pattern that can look very nice. Now, I'm doing this on the outside of a cylinder. A lot of times you're not going to have an application for this on the outside of the cylinder. I want to do a couple of things tonight. I want to show you the different tools, how they work, and what results you can get. But I also want to give you some examples of what can you use these things for. And I'll just glance at a few of them. Here's a platter, and we'll go into this particular decoration in a moment. All right, this is one that's got some texturing on it. Now I'm going to pass that around. It's used by the texturing tool, and the darker color on it is created by using a piece of exotic wood and just kind of burnishing it when you finish. Now before you turn these things for a piece, you're not going to see me sand tonight, but as a general rule, you want to finish your sanding and get it down to the final finish before you texture, because in many instances there might be aspects on either side that you're not going to be able to get in there and sand, so you want to finish it. And also there may be tops of the texture that are going to remain untouched by the tool, and you're not going to have a chance to go back and sand it, or you're going to wind up interfering with the finish. Sometimes I use a toothbrush. My preferred technique for texturing is to use a brass brush. You can get these at Harbor Freight for about 35 cents if you catch them on sale. So they work good. Bear with me here for a second. What else I want to cover? Okay, now that's on side grain. Let's do a piece of face grain as if you were doing a platter or a plate. And I'll circulate that around. Can you catch it? Don't want to hit anybody in the face.
And Mike, once you put your tool to there, the spiraling tool, it's got to stay in contact. If you slip off, you can't really put it back on there and keep going.
Well, we're not talking spiraling right now. We're talking about texturing. So texturing, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. You'll just change the pattern, but you're not going to intentionally want to fall back in on the same place anyway. Hold that thought, and I think that'll come up more when we'll address that when we talk about spiraling. All right, so how would you apply this? Let's try it on a bowl. We'll try a couple of different approaches. If I make any mistakes, my mentor in the back of the room will correct me, Frank Bowers. I learned a lot about spiraling from Frank. So here's a different, now this gives you a nice variation, and what really makes it pop is you're never going to use it like that by itself. You're going to come in behind it, and you're going to delineate or differentiate it from the remaining joining surfaces by any number of techniques. The simplest one is just put a little V-groove on it. And if you do that, it makes it pop a little better. I didn't get them quite even. Let me touch that a little bit more. But that really makes it pop. The other way you can do it is to elevate the surface, and I'll give you an example of that in a little while. Now there's that pattern. Now let's go back and try it with angle. And I'm running it at 663.
You're holding the bar about level, are you?
I start with it engaging the wood at whatever level I set the tool rest, but I set it so when I'm actually engaging the tool, the handle should be higher than the cutter.
All right.
And you're going to put some pressure on it. Depending on the wood, sometimes you have to put a lot of pressure. So make sure you got a good steady grip. Anchor it as best you can. And we're going to move it in the direction of the lower wheel. And you can see this gives a much different, a very pronounced texturing type of effect. And again, let's make it pop a little bit with a V-groove. Of course, you could put a V. We'll demonstrate that in a little while. But you can see that could be a very nice effect to put on a band on the outside of a bowl. You could also put these on the rim of a bowl. So that's the gist of it on texturing. You'll notice on the texturing there is no saddle. You say, well, what's a saddle? It's not the kind you ride on a horse. This is a saddle that comes with the spiraling tool. Texturing tool doesn't need a saddle because you're not going to replicate the angle exactly, but there is this saddle that comes with this system, whether it's the large one or whether it's the small one, whether it's the Sorby system or whether it's the crown system. You can get them with
the spiraling system comes with a saddle, and that's so you can replicate the angle. You can actually texture or spiral, take it off, and come back and re-engage in exactly that same groove, almost like you're doing threading, and continue that pattern. You can also start it at a certain angle. In this case, this tool is numbered 0 to 4. Generally, you want to stay around the 0 to 2. And that's it. On this one, it's not numbered. There's notches on it, and there's an engraved line on the top of the tool. But it gives you a reference mark, and that's all that's important. There's nothing magic about it. Okay, now let's try some spiraling. Now, the spiraling tool, like I say, this one has a gear, a bearing in it, so it spins freely. The smaller one, which is considerably cheaper, has a bronze bushing. There is no bearing, and it doesn't spin quite as freely. And you need to put a drop of oil on that bushing about every time you use it, or once a day. So it'll spin freely, mostly so it won't wear out the thing prematurely. The spiraling tool comes with 3 different wheels. It has a 2mm wheel, a 4mm wheel, and I believe a 6mm wheel, and then there's optional wheels all the way up to almost the Stuart Mortimer barley twist. What's that, 11mm, Frank? It's a big one. And you could, if you were making a chalice, for example, you could put that on the handle of the chalice and literally make a barley twist out of it of sorts, and it could do pretty well.
What?
Barley twist. Spiraling. It's like like a grapevine around a tree, and you had multiples, that would be a barley twist. So this is, I believe, the 4mm I've got on here. Let's give this one a try. Get the speed regulated again. You want it far enough away where it's not going to slip off the saddle. Generally, you want to mount the saddle where it's just about where the opening is. You know, originally when I started using this thing, I'd tighten this thing down, and then when I wanted to change it, I'd untighten it, move this thing over, tighten it. And I found, well, if you just leave it pretty snug, it'll stay where it is, and you can turn it without having to pick up an Allen wrench, and that makes it a little bit easier. So we're going to give this thing a shot here. First thing you do is you give it a trial run. You're only going to do about 1 or 2. And you're going to see what it looks like. It's like, whoa, the sun and the moon set right and everything fell in place. And where we did the texturing tool and it fell in the same hole, it didn't look very attractive, did it? Because you had these broad bands of dots. In this case, you want it to fall in the same hole, because that makes it very neat and clean. Let me show you 2 examples. Here's an example if it doesn't fall in the same hole. And I call these striations. And this, I don't remember which wheel I used, but I can tell it started overlapping. It came all the way around, and then it started overlapping and cutting another slot. So it's not necessarily a bad pattern, but it's what I'd call striations, and if you like it, it's fine. Now, if you don't like it, what you need to do is change the diameter of the wood. So you got to take this off and change the size of it, and hope that the next pass, the diameter that you're cutting on will be an exact multiple of the distance between these 2 teeth.
And you have to refinish it again.
Refinish it. You
said you finish it before you start doing it.
No, I didn't say that. I said you sand your surface first in preparation. Yes. So if you take off your texturing you didn't like, yes, you'd need to touch up the surface with some sandpaper before you try it again. You haven't put any finish on it. So that's striations. No. Now, here's one. Both of these are Bradford pear, where the moon and the stars fell in the right alignment, and it cut just beautifully. It's almost like it's been machined. I've had very few bowls where I got this clean a cut. And it took me a while before I figured out that technique of how you get it right when it doesn't turn out right. You just got to take it down a little bit and try it again. Now you can see in this example, I talked about one way you make it pop is use V-grooves. The other ways you can use beads, or in this case, I elevated the surface on the lower end. Y'all can see that. And then here I did use a little bit of a V-groove, but also I came back and cut it away so it is a little bit proud of the surface. Jimmy?
When you use the term take it down, you mean lessen the diameter a little?
Yes, yes. Take your gouge and then come get in it. It pays to go ahead and put a groove so you got something to kind of catch. And I use my spindle gouge, and you just kind of catch it and take off a little bit of wood, so to bring it down below the
That was
level.
the spiraling tool itself?
That was the spiraling.
Can you show us the difference on the tips between the spiraling tool and the texture tool?
Yep. One looks like a gear in that the teeth are flat. The other, they come to a point.
Okay. I've got the little one, like
The little one is similar. It has a texturing wheel that, as I recall, has, I believe, essentially the same pattern. Maybe not the texturing. The smallest spiraling wheel on the miniature is the same. It will essentially give you the same distance or the same pattern as the smallest wheel on the big system, 2 millimeter.
Okay.
I could do the two tools side by side if I don't go too deep, and you wouldn't be able to tell which tool I used.
Like if you're doing the outside of a bowl, you typically do it before you core the inside of.
Thank you. That's a good teaching point. You absolutely do. You want, or at least before, if it's a rough turn bowl, before you completely finish it, you want as much meat on the thing as you can have, because you may be putting a lot of pressure on it. And if it's too thin, you're liable to get some flexing, and if you get some flexing, you're going to have some problems. Now, one trick you also want to do, and I didn't do it before we started this piece, is do a pencil test anytime you're going to use the spiraling and texturing tool. Just test it. You don't have to turn it on, but just hold it and make sure, without putting any real pressure on the pencil, make sure that you get a pencil mark. Now, if we look at this, you can see it starts thinning out a little bit right here. Well, what that means, if you can find some pieces, you'll do it if it's shifted on you a little bit. It's trued up, you put it back on the chuck, and you didn't bother to retrue it. It's out of true just a little bit. If you have a skip part with your pencil, you're going to have a skip part with your texturing, and it's not going to be attractive. Now, sometimes, if you're doing texturing, I'll pass this around. This has got a combination of spiraling texturing on it, again embellished with some exotic wood, that if you get a texture, here's an example of the kind of texture I'm talking about. If you had a blank spot, you could actually, and you're going to get some texturing, and then you're going to have a spot where the minimal texturing or the pattern will be so noticeably different it will not be attractive. Sometimes you can manually go in there and hand turn it and really put some pressure on those spots with your texturing tool and kind of rough it up a little bit in somewhat of a similar pattern and improve on what you had before. Your best rule is, though, do the pencil test. Pass this around.
But putting pressure on that, Mike, it won't cause part of it to go deeper and part of it shallow, or is that?
If it runs true, you should have the same pressure on the surface of the wood.
If it's not true, like you said there.
Exactly. Mostly it's going to be, I'd say, I'm not sure I'd say pressure on the wood, I'd say contact with the wood is going to be different. Because your tool is not necessarily going to do this, the wood's going to pass it and catch it where it's in contact, and then at the speed it's turning, depending on how you're holding it, you're just going to get some area where it's just going to get skips. So let's see if we can pick this pattern up again. I didn't shift this at all. I've moved my tool rest. That may impact it a little bit. We'll see. Speed up by 500. Now what you do is you just feel it. You just ease it in until hopefully it falls into place. And I don't think I'm getting it. And the way I move this thing is I tend to pivot it a little bit back and forth. And now we're getting some overlap on the bottom end, and it's fairly clean at the top. So sometimes you got to reach that point. It's like, well, can I live with that? Is that acceptable? And it may be. Now I showed you a spear point tool.
Situations when somebody looks at it, how do you do that?
It's just
Very carefully.
it's just a character feature. The other tool. Two other tools I use instead of a V, the spear point, is a pyramid tool. Some of y'all were in Bob's class and you may already have one of these. This is a high-speed steel 8-inch rod from Inco, and it's got three surfaces on it. They don't have to be perfect, but generally this tool, I tend to like the one that's a 5/16 inch, and this is from a 4.5, I believe it's 4.5. I can't remember how long. I think it's either 4.5 or 6 inches, but it's considerably shorter. I think it's 4.5. You only bury it about an inch deep, but it doesn't have to stick off very far because what you're using it for is small, delicate kind of work. And I just like having a little bigger surface, and this seems to work a little better for me. This tool is real handy for box making. It's very handy if you're doing thread chasing. You can use it for a number of different things, and one of them is just is similar to that spear point. It's just pushing it straight in at a slight downward angle and make a V groove. The other thing you can do with it though is you can turn small beads with it. Put your finger on it, drop the handle, roll it across the top of the bead, go in the other direction, insert it, roll, lift, drop the handle and roll it across. Now, do you get a perfect bead? Well, some of that's how much practice. Sometimes you tend to get a little tear out because you are using it as a scraper. But in many instances, on many woods, it does just fine. You touch it up with a bit of sandpaper, and it'll smooth it right out, and you get a nice bead with less effort than you might get with a spindle gouge. And these both work especially well on smaller things like boxes or the bottom of a bowl. Outside of a bowl, I would tend to want to use a spindle gouge, but for the bottom of a box or the top of a box, let me show you an example of texturing. This little acorn box, the husk, I actually use the texturing tool to rough it up. But other choices could very well be like the one that Jack got tonight, is using the Wagner tool, the knurling tool, and you actually build up a pattern and then you move the tool in degrees, picking up the pattern, laying down another track, getting it in place, and we'll talk about that. But that's just another alternative tool to do something similar on a similar project, but get a slightly different effect. You know, it kind of depends on what you like. I've also done them with the cross hatching, with the spiraling tool. The results I found tend to be less predictable on walnuts. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it has a tendency to tear out a little bit. So I find that these other tools tend to work better for that particular application. Other things you can use these tools on, I had an article earlier last year on making these business card holders, but I just decorated the end with some texturing, with some little spirals, cut it in half, made each end. That's one. Little boxes. There's an example of chatter work we'll talk about in a little while. But texturing a box works very well. And using that little point tool to make tiny little V grooves on the bottom, just to give it a little bit of a detail. Here's a technique I want to show you. This another technique I learned from Frank. This is a little practice bowl. It's not useful for anything. It was just literally I was practicing, and then I decided, well, what the heck, let's go ahead and finish it and make it a bowl. And then I'd taken it off and turned it around, and it's like, gosh, how am I going to chuck this thing up? And I was able to get it in the chuck, put some grooves, and grasp the grooves with my Supernova 2. Kind of hard to do with a Talon, but Supernova 2 works well because it's got these little lip on it. But this is what I'd call a rope, and basically what that is, and we're going to take this part right here and turn that into a rope, is you're going to, I'll tell you what, we're going to use the one we've already started on. You take a band that you're going to turn into a bead. So we're going to turn this part right here into a large bead. Now, in order for us to get to it, we're going to take down the area on either side. So the wheel, when we start to spiral, we don't cut into it. Numbers, except as a reference. A low number is a very small angle. A higher number is a much higher angle. So that's what that saddle's for. Now, to give you an example, what difference would it make when you're going to use it and replicate an angle? Let me show you an example of if you're using a herringbone pattern. I don't want to throw this one. Cork might come later. Where you're making a diamond hatching on it, cross hatching on it, you want the angles to be the same in one direction or the other, so you'll have a nice even pattern. Okay, now let's try some spiraling. Now, the spiraling tool, like I say, this one has a gear, a bearing in it, so it spins freely. The smaller one, which is considerably cheaper, has a bronze bushing. There is no bearing, and it doesn't spin quite as freely. And you need to put a drop of oil on that bushing about every time you use it, or once a day. So it'll spin freely, mostly so it won't wear out the thing prematurely. The spiraling tool comes with 3 different wheels. It has a 2mm wheel, a 4mm wheel, and I believe a 6mm wheel, and then there's optional wheels all the way up to almost the Stuart Mortimer barley twist. What's that, 11mm, Frank? It's a big one.
Yes,
and you could, if you were making a chalice, for example, you could put that on the handle of the chalice and literally make a barley twist out of it of sorts, and it could do pretty well.
What?
Barley twist. Spiraling. It's like like a grapevine around a tree, and you had multiples, that would be a barley twist. So this is, I believe, the 4mm I've got on here. Let's give this one a try. Get the speed regulated again. You want it far enough away where it's not going to slip off the saddle. Generally, you want to mount the saddle where it's just about where the opening is. You know, originally when I started using this thing, I'd tighten this thing down, and then when I wanted to change it, I'd untighten it, move this thing over, tighten it. And I found, well, if you just leave it pretty snug, it'll stay where it is, and you can turn it without having to pick up an Allen wrench, and that makes it a little bit easier. So we're going to give this thing a shot here. First thing you do is you give it a trial run. You're only going to do about 1 or 2, and you're going to see what it looks like. It's like, whoa, the sun and the moon set right, and everything fell in place. And where we did the texturing tool and it fell in the same hole, it didn't look very attractive, did it? Because you had these broad bands of dots. In this case, you want it to fall in the same hole, because that makes it very neat and clean. Let me show you 2 examples. Here's an example. So we've got this rough looking bead. It's flat. We've spiraled it. Then what we're going to do is just come back and take the edges of it and just kind of round it over a little bit. Just knock the edges off. You're going to do that on both sides. Now those of y'all that seen a threading demonstration where you come back in and you're picking up with that threading tool and picking up in the groove, we're going to do exactly the same thing here. We're going to try anyway. And what I'm going to do is I pick it up, then I'm going to roll it over and take it down the sides of the bead a little bit. Speed 400, 600. Remember, it's on the exam. So I'm going to lightly insert it, lift the handle until I feel like I'm engaging, and then pivot, come around. And then you get this nice rounded bead with this texturing on it. And in some instances, depending on what your effect, if you want it to really look like a rope or have kind of a weathered effect, you can use multiple tools. So you can come back in with a texturing tool, straight up and down. You don't want a broad texture, you want just those little orange peel effect. Just come in and lightly just put a little bit of a few little dots on it. And you can barely see those. Let's take a piece of exotic wood, take a strip.
Mike, you're at 2 times 15.
Okay, about right where I need to be. I'm on the second tool. See? We're going to crank this speed up a little bit. And we're just going to... You can also come in there and, you know, put it in a groove to help make it pop. But it can give you a nice effect. And again, and if you had taken this off the lathe and put it back on where it didn't run true, if you go back and start texturing it, coloring it with a stick, you're liable to get some skips, and it's not going to look as attractive. And then, of course, depending on the wood, you're going to have side grain and end grain, and that can affect the coloring a little bit. But all in all, it's just another tool to play with and practice and see how you like it. Here's a little bitty practice piece that shows some of those different. I'm just going to pass it around. Yeah, that's. All right, let's see what I've missed so far. Okay. All right, we're going to switch over. We're going to skip doing the crosshatch. I've explained how it works and the results you get, so we're not going to take time with that, so we'll have time to get on the other tools.
That's the only reason I came tonight to see that.
Oh, stay over.
Okay.
Be a special lesson.
Like you mentioned, there might be some problems with walnuts.
Not necessarily a problem. I've just found on those acorn boxes, the variation in walnut, I've had just different results from one piece of wood to another. That some of them did the cross hatching fairly well, others not so well, and I've just and also when I've got these other tools like the Wagner tool, I've decided I really kind of like the nice uniform pattern of the Wagner
Are there any
knurling
woods
tool.
that are especially good or especially bad?
That's a good question. I should have mentioned that earlier. In general, you want to use fine textured, tight grain, smooth wood. You don't want spalted wood. Two reasons. It's going to tear up on you when you apply a tool to it because you're going to hit soft spots no matter what. The other reason is you're going to have competing things for the interest that probably not going to make your piece look good. Sometimes less is more, but you have a lot of heavy duty color, texture, on top of something that's already natural, and it may tend to fight with a person's viewing of it, and it's just not going to necessarily be attractive. It specifically, I have real good luck tend to have real good luck with maple, tend to have real good luck with cherry. I tend to have excellent luck with Bradford pear, and then those are the three most common woods. But I've textured on other things, and if you're dealing with platters, sometimes your range gets a little bit bigger. You're only going to put a small band on it, and sweet gum, maybe you may or may not have textured a sweet gum bowl, but on a platter with a big surface on it, you might want to try it. When it comes to boxes, I tend to make those out of the same kind of hard, tight-grained woods, but also I make a lot of them out of exotic woods that are very, very hard and tight-grained. And they work well. Also, I'll pass some of these as we get to that. So let's talk about the knurling tool.
While you're setting up for that, Mike, one more question on the speed and the diameters. First way I had, it's not variable speed, but about the slowest speed it'll go is 750.
Okay.
I'm thinking that was probably my only problem. But looking at what you did with the diameter, I think it's a compound problem with diameter and the speed. But it just like I was chewing it up.
There's a couple of possibilities. When it comes to chewing it up, it could be the wood.
I've tried different woods.
Okay.
I've tried maple,
It
I've tried
can also
bark.
be the angle of your cutter. If you get too aggressive, are you talking spiraling or texturing?
Either, didn't matter.
Okay. I don't know what.
Feel like I was just sticking salt to it.
If you do too big an angle with spiraling or texturing, where it doesn't allow this to spin very freely because you got so many forces going down as opposed to like this where it's going to cause a turn, you're going to more likely chew up the wood. So that's why I recommend don't going much past 2 on this tool.
I was using some instructions and stuff that come with it, and give you some ideas of how, what angles and to do that. But
The speed at 750 should probably not have been a major problem.
okay.
Frank, you got any other ideas? Why I'd chew it up? Maybe you're pressing too hard.
I think it's that. Did you try the sharpening tool?
It's brand new. It don't come sharp. No? Okay.
They come sharp, but you can sharpen. The problem I had was I bought my set and I used it for a while, got it to work and it was doing fine, and I put it aside. And about a year later, I picked it up and said, oh, I'm going to do some spiraling work. Wouldn't work. Couldn't figure it out. So right about that time, there's a guy in England, his name is Mick Hambrick. I ordered his DVD, but then I called him on the phone. I said, I had this thing and it worked for a while, then it don't work anymore. You know, the first thing he said, did you sharpen the tool? I said, yes. He says, the corner, that corner, the top corner of the spiral, not the spiraling tool, if you round it over just the least little bit, it will not cut. Because that top corner is what actually does the cutting. And you bring it not at center, but a little below center, and let it bite into the wood and bring it up. Bring it up.
Yeah.
It's like any turning
So it's a
tool.
brand- it's a brand new
Sharp
tool.
is the intersection of two planes
Yeah.
on a exactly touching.
Yeah.
And if you round it over, you're just not going to get that sharp intersection.
But yeah, like I say, it's a brand new tool out of package. I've not used it.
Feel free to give me a call, come on over, and I'll be glad to work with you on it, and we'll give you a try.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Here's a couple other ways you can use texturing. You can also use it on the rim. And it's in that notebook that goes around, I'm not about to take credit for those examples in there, but Eugen Schlack, a fella out of, I think, Ontario, Canada, has really gotten a lot of mileage out of this tool. And I'll give him credit for inspiring me to figure out how to keep pushing myself on getting more. And he did a lot of fancy rim work. And he's done cross-hatching and double patterns, and he's got some really good examples in there. But here's an example where it's using the spiraling tool, but it's using it similar to using that texturing tool where you're getting the orange peel. Straight on, 90 degrees, no turns. And then you're going to get this nice little, and you can see an example of that on this tiny little bowl. on the inside, right along the rim, you get these nice smooth little cuts. We'll start that around. So that's another example of how you can add it. This one I didn't use an exotic wood. I actually used patinating wax, and it kind of smeared it and it got inside it instead of just on the top surface. It's kind of muddy looking. It's not as pretty as I might have liked. But coloring is an example of other ways you can use texturing. Here's an example of an egg that has used the texturing tool on it, and I then went back over it with some rub and buff after I put a coat of finish on it to kind of seal some of the pores a little bit. And that's one way to do it. I use the spiraling tool just as I was telling you, straight on right here, and you get those nice straight up and down marks, which just gives you a slightly different texture. This one used the knurling tool and gives you a nice pattern. I'm going to talk about the knurling tool now. That's got two different, depending on how you use it, you can wind up with two different patterns. One is a diamond pattern. The other one, you might call it a weave pattern. And it depends on whether you're hitting the piece dead on or whether you're a little high or you're a little low. And then here's a little egg I did where I used some liming wax. Well, I didn't use it real well and fill in the pores. If I'd worked a little harder, probably would have done better with a finer spiral on it instead of using a coarse wheel. If I'd used a 2mm wheel, I'd have probably had a little bit of luck with the liming wax. But putting liming wax in it is an alternative, depending on your wood. Putting in a patinating wax with colored shoe polish can also work. So those are different ways to make it pop.
On your bowl over there, you say you put the wax on it and sort of cover up the texture. If you still had it on the lathe, could you go back over the tool again?
I could have, but at the point I did that, it had already had the bottom removed, and it was off the lathe, and I was in the finishing stage.
But it would cut in to make fresh, so your indentations.
Yeah,
fresh cut.
yeah, good. All right, let's get that cylinder I was using for. Do the Wagner tool, or Ron Brown's best texturizing tool. Guy named Joe Wagner out of Utah did the first one of these that at least got his name on it, but my understanding, there's nothing new under the sun. There was a guy named Marty Pigeon that came from England a number of years before it demonstrated in the United States that had already taken one of these machinist knurling tools. And this is an adaptation of a tool from tool and die machining industry, the way they mount it on a handle. It is not a scraper, it's an embosser. So it makes its pattern by actually embedding itself in the wood. So to use this, we're going to have to take off a little bit of wood here. There's basically 4 variations of the tool. There's a 16 threads per inch and a 12 threads per inch. And depending on who you're buying them from, sometimes there's a 1/4 inch wide wheel or a 3/8 inch wide wheel. You say, okay, a lot of numbers, what difference does it make? Bottom line is smaller teeth works better for harder wood. You try to cut harder wood or emboss harder wood with these bigger teeth, and you're going to have a little more of an effort getting a good pattern. If you were doing large surface area, then you'd be better off with a larger wheel. If your goal primarily is to put a little bit of a design on the inside of a box or doing a tiny little rim on the bottom of a bowl, then probably you'd be better off with a narrow one. Again, you get it far enough apart from the tool rest so you don't have to worry about that gear as it spins around touching you. Again, similar to the miniature spiraling and texturing wheel that doesn't have a bearing in it, This is just a hardened steel pin that this thing revolves in. So again, similar to that Sorby red handle one, you need to put a drop of light machine oil on it once a day or every time you use it to make sure you don't get excessive wear. So we're going to have this thing where, again, want to get a pretty good aggressive grip. Generally speaking, you want to come at the wood at 90 degrees. You may vary that a little bit from time to time on some patterns, but the general rule of thumb is line your tool rest up parallel with the face of the work you're doing, and come at with a tool at, remember this is on the exam, 600 to 800.
4 to 6.
4 to 6, 6 to 8, depends on the tool. All right, so we're going to press this in. The biggest problem people have with not using this tool effectively is they get impatient. You gotta hold it there and let it do its job, because it's not cutting it, it's embossing it. Something and this is what I would call a weave pattern, not what I'd call a specially attractive. And I'll come back. Now that was the big one. Now let's try the smaller one. And this is more of a diamond type of effect, which is really what the pattern of these staggered teeth are. Now I can come back in and put another layer, and when I do, what I'm going to do is just overlap it, and again try to get the first row of teeth to fall into the last row of teeth on this groove that's here. Try to feel for it, lightly let it find its way in there, then engage it and overlap it. So we're going to and this might be burn, or it might be oil being slung off of this thing, because I didn't bring oil with me. I lubed all these things before I came here. Let's take that.
And again, on these, can the pattern be changed by changing the diameter?
Say again?
The pattern be changed by changing the diameter where they meet up the next time around?
Again, generally not unless you're going at an excessive speed and using it like a chatter tool, because again, similar to using the spiraling and texturing wheel, it's going slow enough where you're maintaining contact, and can you see that? It maintains that contact. That's why you get the pattern, because it keeps falling into the same place, same holes.
The bigger the spacing between the sharp points, the more effect that's going to have.
The diameter changes because
With
the
the
last one,
texture being real small, you're not going to see it change.
because the last one.
It chews it just like the other, it's just not visible. When you get down to the real tiny pitch, it has the same effect in the wood, but it's so minute you can't see it.
Okay, some other objects that you can play with. Some of y'all remember Jack's hot air balloon from Christmas. A couple of people got it at the Christmas swap. Had a little gondola basket. There was an example where I did the hatch, used the spiraling tool, and did it on one side and then set the same angle on the other. So I got that nice little cross hatching to make it look like a woven basket. And then use a little burn wire to burn it. Here's a couple of lamp pulls. I got an article coming out in the, I think the June issue of American Woodturner on making lamp pulls, but maybe this is overkill, but it's something to play with, you know, to add a little texture to some of them. just because you can.
That knurling tool that you were using, it looks similar to the type of tool that you used with dressing wheels up on a grinder. Are the ones on the grinder solid like that, or were they separate wheels?
Those are wavy. The ones I recall, they have a wave pattern to them, but the surface is flat. You could take, but I guess it depends on which model you get. If you had an old one and you weren't using it for anything else, you know, literally you were going to throw it away, you could probably take off one of those wheels, mount it on a bar with a, depending on whether it's on a bearing or something, or put it on a steel pin, you got to somehow mount it, probably with a washer on each side, and you could probably turn it into some sort of texturing tool. Whether it's worth the effort, what I would suggest, if you want to texture and you want to texture on the low end, price-wise, I'm a frugal kind of guy. This is the cheapest way to do it. You go out and buy a replacement wheel from Hartville Tool, using a club that gives you a 15% discount. They'll give clubs a 15% discount if they send them their membership list. Free shipping. The Sorby wheel is about $45. The crown wheel, which is virtually identical in quality and size and everything, is about $26. So get you a crown wheel, comes with a bearing, get you a piece of cold rolled steel, tap it, put a bolt on it, put your 2 washers. That's an interesting thing about the way this thing mounts. You got 2 washers on one side and 1 washer on the other. So if you buy a new one and you're taking it loose on the Sorby system the first time, be aware you're going to have washers flying out of there or dropping into sawdust. So be aware that when you put it together, count them. There needs to be 3 washers, 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. If you don't, it won't spin freely, because you're going to have contact where it shouldn't have contact on that bearing. Okay, now let's do the front of this thing. We've done the side. Because to me, the main purpose for this tool is for end grain, is using it for boxes. We're going to try to get this dead center. I'm going to lower it a little bit.
You didn't give them the disclaimer.
Which one?
The one that no matter what they do, they can't duplicate it.
Well, that's pretty much true.
You can't duplicate it.
Well, I was going to give that disclaimer when we get to the chattering tool. Sometimes you can accidentally duplicate these others. The chatter tool, all bets are off. You'll never. It's like snowflakes. Trust me on that. So we're going to just press in. That slipped, so it's going to change the pattern a little bit. And we'll come back and take a close. This time I'm going to turn it a little bit fast. I was going a little bit slow. I'm going to start it straight on, and then I'm going to roll it and move it out a little bit. Let's see what that does for it. Got to be patient. Wait for it. Wait for it. And I'm going to slowly roll the tool and move it out to the edge. Slowly. All right, let's see what we got.
Were you pivoting or sliding out?
I was pivoting and sliding, or actually, yeah, pivoting, keeping this, and then rolling this over. And we'll take the. Let's kind of differentiate these things. Again, on the bottom of a box or top of a box, you don't want to just put some type of texture on it and let it go. You really do need to put a band of some sort on it where probably the pattern changes. And then if you want to do that bead again, get a little bit closer here. Come in. You can see it's got a negative rake on it, so if you hold the tool parallel with the tool rest. The edge is at a negative rate, which is a good thing because it's a scraper. We're just going to press it in. Index finger right along the top so I know where I am. And then I'm going to drop the handle and just come across that bead and just sort of kiss it. And then I'm going to come in the other direction, same thing, drop the handle, come across and just sort of kiss it. I kissed it too much and tore off part of the bead, I could feel it. But can y'all see that pattern? Yeah, that shows up pretty well. Now here's an example of where the kind of wood you really wouldn't want to texture for a box. You got this big ambrosia beetle stain on it, which can kind of be attractive by itself. You don't want to come in and texture on top of that on a box or a bowl because it's just not going to be real attractive. They're going to kind of compete with for the main attraction. Okay, there's a Wagner. Okay. Any other questions on the Wagner tool before we go on to the Dremel burr tool?
When you're using that pyramid tool, you get the three sides.
Yep.
Is it flat on the top or the bottom?
Flat's on the top. Yeah, that's a good question. Think of it, if you're familiar with the Cindy Drozia vortex tool, same thing, flat on the top. And if you think of it also, if you ever forget, think about how you'd use the spear point scraper. What does it look like if you're using it? Flat on top, coming to a point. Same concept. All right. Crown makes one of these things, and basically it uses a little Dremel burr. They've got 3 different ones they recommend. You can try others, but there's 3 specific ones. I have a handout that I put together on my blog on how you make one of these. So this is Bob Aldea's idea. It doesn't have a bearing. The ones you pay $60, $70 for has got a bearing, 2 bearings in it. They work real nice. It's got a little, embedded down here, you got a little rare earth magnet. This one does too. So when you pop this in, you hear it kind of click, that magnet pulls it down and it spins freely against that magnet and it won't just fall out. However, if I turn it the wrong way while I'm cutting with it, zing, it's going to pull it right out. So you do use this in a upward motion. So the variation that Bob Aldea came up with was a low-cost solution of using a bronze bushing, similar to the bronze bushing that Sorby uses here. Different kind of bushing, but it's bronze. And you glue those into this is a brass plumbing nipple, and you get the bushing that fits that nipple. Maybe you might have to wrap a piece of tape around it and then glue it in with a little epoxy. And there's a dowel inside here that braces the magnet. Now, in this design, this particular model, if I had to do it over again, I would have it go a little bit deeper. So it would support it a little bit better when I get a lot of pressure on it. But it's still working, so I'm not going to worry about it.
You can't shove that magnet down any further.
It's sitting on a dowel.
Oh.
That dowel ain't going anywhere.
Not going anywhere.
All right, here's a little cove tool. If you can look in the craft supply catalog, you can buy one of these things for Crown for about, I don't know, $35 or $40. But it's basically a little bitty tool bit that I ground flat. And for this particular burr, it tends to work better if you have a little bit of a concave surface. So we're going to give this a try. And I could probably use a spindle gouge for this, but this little concave tool just for this purpose, and I already had the tool bit on hand, already mounted in a handle, and I couldn't figure out what kind of tool it wanted to be until I got into this texturing, and then thought, well, yeah, I'll make one of these imitation little crown kind of tools. So we're going to come back here, we're going to lower the speed. We're going to drop the tool rest, and we're going to come in at a pretty, I'd like to drop it further, so we'll just,
Where's the bar?
the shorter bar.
The shorter bar.
Yeah, Yeah, the way Jet designed this thing, they got this bar that comes all the way through it, so it hits that bar. So you can't use for example, a Powermatic, even though it's used the same 1-inch post, won't work on a Jet 1642. So I'm going to come at it at an angle. And again, similar to that knurling tool, this does some cutting. It doesn't emboss. You're just going to hold it in there though and have a little bit of patience. You can see from this round burr that it probably wouldn't do as well on a flat surface. So it likes this kind of concave surface. And with that ambrosia on there, it kind of fools you, but it makes a nice little round texturing inside there. And let's try something a little different. I think I've got it on something. I don't think I brought a sample of that. You can make a nice little flower pattern, and that's what I'm going to attempt to do, which is kind of unique with this tool because you can get into a very, very small area, you know, a little more than a half inch, about maybe a half-inch across, and make this little flowered, little kind of a rosette at the bottom. It's kind of neat. Let me try it one more time. Again, handle in this case is lower than the burr. Don't go quite to the center or you won't get the burr turning. So you got to back off the center just a little bit. And there's probably a better example. Let me make it pop with this thing. With a point tool. Now, can you get a... See that little rosette right there in the center? And that could be a nice little feature on the inside of a box. You get a small box. Texture within. And it doesn't give you a remarkably fancy pattern, it just gives you little straight marks. But if you had a feature where you wanted it in a concave area, you couldn't do that with most of the other tools. So it's kind of depends on what you're going to use it for. Now, any other questions on this particular tool? So like I said, I got a handout on making one the way I made this one. There's also a link that'll take you to Highland, where Phil Coulson shows you how to make one with using a different approach, but I had a very hard time sourcing the parts at a reasonable cost. Highland also sells a kit for about $30, which is probably, if you want to just get in there and do it cheap without having to run around and find part numbers and play with it, just pay $30 and get the kit. All you got to do is assemble it with a handle, and you're in good shape. Now, there's this type of burr. I've got one other burr, and this other burr is a cylinder, and I actually picked it up at Home Depot, right there where they keep all the other Dremel stuff. You don't use the end of this thing. You're going to use the side. Might get a little bit of the corner on it. again, this gives you a little straight-on patterns, a little raised-up torn area where I caught the corner, and I could duplicate that with the spiraling tool by going straight on. So I haven't found, you know, a particularly advantage to this particular burr. I like the round one. They also have one they call a flame or a bud or something that might be more versatile, I don't know.
Now, can you go back and pick up that same pattern, or will, when,
It would be a challenge with this tool, maybe. I haven't tried. It's one of those things where you got to be patient, make sure you're getting deep enough, and then pull it off when you're done.
yeah.
All right, the next item brings us down to the last tool, and that's the chatter tool. This is one that Bonnie Klein has popularized. She's gotten a lot of mileage out of what this tool will do. And this tool, most of these tools will do side grain and in grain. The chatter tool will only do in grain. It just won't work on side grain. It is not something, I cannot imagine how you'd ever use it on a bowl or a platter, for example. Just don't even think about it. It's really, it's good for tops, and it's good for Christmas tree ornaments, and it's good for boxes. After that, I'm not sure what else you'd be turning that would really be suitable for it, but all those things would work. I've got a rough edge on it. And now I'm going to come across with a scraper and just fine tune that edge a little bit. Now, how hard do you press with a scraper? Richard Raffin says you put about the same pressure on it as you put on your hands when you're drying them under an air dryer. I thought that was kind of an interesting frame of reference. And he's the man. All right, so we're going to chatter. Now, a chatter tool basically is just a thin piece of metal that vibrates. And what varies the texture is going to be the speed that you're turning, the density and tightness of grain on the wood, the type of cutter and how it's sharpened, and the angle of attack you hit the wood with. That is, are you hitting it flat or are you hitting it at an angle? And how fast you're moving it. So with 5 or 6 different variables, the chances you ever duplicating them, it ain't gonna happen. But you can have some interesting effects. Now, Sorby's got a video on their website on how to use the tool, and they say you come across flat like this. And if you go across the top, you'll get swirls in one direction. You go down below center, you get swirls the other direction. Bonnie Klein, who I think has probably played with a lot more than probably one employee at Sorby, is you come in about near center or wherever you're going to start your pattern, and then you angle it down to about 730 at a speed somewhere between 1,000, 1,500 to 3,000. So we're just going to, I don't know how fast this thing's going. Before I do it, let me make sure I got it tight.
Yeah.
I think I got it tight, but we're going to make sure I got it tight. Pretty dry wood, but you know, still moving. Wood's wood. All right, so we're just going to spin that thing, back it off a little bit. I don't even know how fast it's going. I'm not even going to look. We'll come in here like this. You push it until it squeals. If it's not squealing, it is not working. Then you lift it up to change the pattern, and the pattern will also change because the diameter of the wood's changing. So we're going to lift it up. Almost knocked my Allen wrench loose.
Clarify the 730, is that the angle of the...
No, that's the direction you're moving from the center of the clock to 730 on the face of the clock. So you're moving from here down across the face of the clock down to the 7:30.
Okay.
You just have to move it lower down center.
Yeah, it's not critical, but that's a frame of reference.
But you have to go at an angle like that.
No, you don't have to. That's just the way she does it. And then again, you want to probably punch this up a little bit. And you can see all the different variations in that pattern board that went around with all the little different rosettes with all the different wheels. A lot of them you can get very similar results. Now, how fast you go on this will definitely affect the pattern. The faster you go, the less, the coarser the pattern. The slower you go, the finer the pattern.
Repeat that, please.
The faster the lathe is going, the coarser the pattern. And think about it. It's at this spot. First it's at this spot, and then a couple of nanoseconds later it's at this spot. And that thing is vibrating like this. So if it goes from here to here, you're going to get a coarser pattern, but if it goes from here to here, because it's turning slower, you're going to get a finer pattern.
Okay, let's do it as surface speed.
Surface speed, exactly. Now you say, do you have to go down that way? No, let's try something different. This time I'm going to use this flat surface instead of the point. And let's see what we get. And I'm going to have a little harder time angling it down, but I'm going to give it a shot. Actually, I'm going to come straight across. I think it's a little easier to control. And I'm at almost 2,000. Pressing it in. It's hard to tell. It didn't do anything real heavy, but by using the side of it, instead of getting little tiny little marks, you're going to tend to get scalloping. And the scalloping will vary depending on the wood and how hard, but it can give you some very interesting effects. Now actually the best scalloping I've had is when I used the round nose tool. Now making these things, you can buy these things for $60 or $70. Or you can make one, and you know, there's articles out there. You can grab a Sawzall and grind it up and hold it with a piece of with a pair of vice grips. You know, if you want to do that, that's fine. But it's not a real fun way to play with a box or something you're really going to make. If you just want to put steel in fast turning wood, you know, you can play with it, but you're not going to be real happy with it. You can either buy a replacement tip for $10 or so from whoever's selling the chattering tools, and then you know you're going to get predictable results. It's 3/8 of an inch wide, it's about 2.5 inches long, and it's about 1/16 of an inch thick. Now, what I found a real good source, if you go to Harbor Freight, you get this, I'll pass this around, it's been used in so many demos, the box is falling apart, but you can get the part number off of it, it's on my handout. It's 5 different little tool bits. One of them is a machinist's cutoff tool. That's what it looks like. That one's been ground. That's what it looks like. This is a 1/2 inch wide, 3/8, so it's a little stiffer. So if you want to sort of work it like the other one, just extend it out another 1/4, 3/8 of an inch. So you'll get some vibration. And I found this to be very effective. You can also grind it a little differently and just make you a miniature parting tool.
What's the material?
High-speed steel.
Carbide wouldn't work with it.
I don't know. I don't know why you'd want to use carbide. It's probably too stiff. It'd probably break. You want it to flex.
That's another question I had. All the other tools you use, how they work on a bearing or some sort like that, and it's working.
Bushing.
Yeah. the metal is actually flexing. This is more of a safety question than anything. And if you take a piece of metal so many times and you flex it enough, it's going to stress fracture and break. Have you had that happen?
I have never heard of that happening on a chatter tool. So theoretically, I would say probably, as a lot of engineers in here agree with you. As a practical matter, you're worried about something that's just not something to worry about. Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand. But that comes with my disclaimer that, you know, you broke it, you fix it.
Is it correct to say that you always keep the tool handle on the tool rest and not any of the flexing metal?
As a general rule, that's true, because if you use the, I'll pass this one around, it wouldn't vibrate properly if you did it like this. Now, it might, I haven't tried it, but I think it would probably so interfere with the vibration you'd have a hard time getting a good texture. So you probably wouldn't want to do that.
It changed the pattern for sure.
Oh, it definitely changed the pattern for sure. Now, this one's made out of a piece of conduit with a hole drilled through it with a nut on the inside. This happens to be a rectangular nut. It's a special purpose nut that goes on these bolts that you fasten two countertops together. But you could use any kind of nut underneath it. And then you put a little less than half of a round dowel that you turn to fit this surface. Now, is it perfect? No. But it was easy for me to do, and I didn't have to drill, tap, do anything really fancy. So that will work. Now, I saw a video the other day, sometime back actually, a guy named Brendan Stemp. He has a BS Minute on wood turning about every couple of weeks on YouTube. But he says, use a butter knife. So you go in there and get one of your wife's old butter knives when she's not looking. You grind one side.
Go to Goodwill.
Yeah. Well, I went to Goodwill. I was going to see who I could hook on that one. But I went to Goodwill. I paid 75 cents a piece for this. I was generous because the money was going for a good cause. You grind. Now here, this is an important tip. Grind on the blade side, the knife side. Leave the other side as it is. So when you're rubbing it on your tool rest or you're at an angle, you know, you're on that rounded edge. It's already there for you. Don't get fancy and say, I want this thing this wide and grind on both sides. You're going to have a really rough thing scraping up and down on your tool rest. So I've got two surfaces here. I got the round surface and then I got the pointed surface. Now, I don't think I mentioned it, and I'm not sure if you can see it here, but there's probably a 70-degree bevel on the, you can see it on the one that's going around. It's about a 70-degree bevel, and you're going to put that same bevel on this. And if you do a round one, the same thing. In other words, when you put it on the grinder, it's going to be at a slight angle. So you're going to have a slight bevel on it. So let's smooth this off and give it a shot. So you can see it's a lot of fun just playing with this stuff. If you just like playing, texturing tools are a lot of fun to play with. First guy brought this old David Ingmar brought one of these big Sorby tools over to my workshop. And then we had him actually come do a demonstration. This is about 6 years ago. Some of y'all may remember. And he showed me that tool, and I thought, wow, that's a fun tool. That looks like a lot of fun. And I looked it up. Well, that's an expensive tool. That's a lot of money. And I went and looked at all the turnings I had. I'd only been turning less than a year. And everything I'd had was fortunate was spalted wood and figured wood, and texturing just wouldn't have done anything for any of it. So I went out and got some, so I thought, well, I'll put that on my to-do list. When next time Sorby has a 20% off sale, maybe I'll get one. Lo and behold, I got this flyer on email, Hartville tool. They had the best price anyway. Then they dropped off 20%. Free shipping. I thought, okay, this is meant to be. So I invested in one and started playing with Bradford pear. And Bradford pear just does real well. So we're going to crank this baby up and we're going to see what happens. Now, because it's a little wider, it's not high-speed steel, it's whatever steel it is, I'm going to extend it over just a little bit more, and this might break. Who knows, you know. Now, see, this has got some interesting patterns. Now, it's one long, continuous row, not necessarily too nice. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. if it extends off far enough, so as long as you got some vibration. Now, there's a guy named Michael Mosho out in Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona, Phoenix, not Phoenix, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he did some demonstrations on texturing. And one of the techniques that he used was texturing. He showed how you could texture with a spindle gouge. I don't remember exactly what he did, but if you get a piece of steel extending off far enough, no matter how big it is, where it flexes, you can get some texture.
Chattering.
It was interesting. Now, Dave Ingmeyer found a technique, developed a technique, and Bob Alday has seen it. He does these big platters. When he finishes, he'll take his bowl gouge and run it across this platter with the thing hanging off the tool rest. I don't know what's I suspect the wood is doing most of the flexing, not the bar of steel. But he'll bring the back of the tool rest, the heel, across that big turning, and he'll have this very subtle, bold kind of pattern, not unlike the one I got with this round edge, but on a more subtle scale. And you almost have to hold it up against the light and get some see it. But it's kind of an interesting surprise on the back of a piece. So there's lots of different ways you can texture with different tools. But if you want to play with it, this is the cheapest and easiest way. I don't think they're quite as good as the regular one, but they're pretty doggone close, and you can play with it and be successful with it. All right. Any questions? Thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of...